It was just 7 minutes from the time the aircraft contact first appeared on radar to the time the captain ordered an attack.
So I think it was an understandable accident to shoot and think that they were under attack from that plane.
The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran considers this a premeditated act of aggression and a premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
Good evening, I'm Barry Serafin, and this is Nightline. An Iranian jetliner shot down by a U.S. warship in the Persian Gulf. 290 passengers and crew killed. How could it have happened? What are the consequences? That's our story tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from New York, Barry Serafin.
President Reagan today called the downing of an Iranian airliner by American missiles yesterday a tragic but understandable accident. And he declared there will be no change in the U.S. policy of protecting shipping in the Persian Gulf. Iran called the attack murder, a savage and ruthless crime. And the Ayatollah Khomeini urged his country to wage all-out war against the United States and its allies. The U.S. and Iran disagree over just about everything, whether the airliner was off course, how fast it was going, whether it was warned. And now more than ever, they disagree over the broader issue of whether the United States should maintain a military presence in the Gulf. Here at home, as Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield reports, somber questions are being asked on this 4th of July about what happened yesterday and what will or should happen in the future.
These are the comforting images we expect to see as America celebrates its 212th birthday. But on Sunday morning, on the other side of the world, reality at its worst intruded. All 290 passengers and crew members aboard Iran Air Flight 655 died after the craft was shot down by 2 missiles from an American cruiser on duty in the Persian Gulf.
I won't minimize the tragedy. We all know that it was a tragedy.
This was an pure act of terrorism. It is an international moral outrage.
For an America that eagerly turns inward each 4th of July, the tragedy in the distant Persian Gulf raises 3 key questions. What happened? How could it have happened? And what will happen next? At 10 after 10 on Sunday morning, a helicopter from the USS Windesens, flying over the Persian Gulf, came under fire from an Iranian boat in the Strait of Hormuz. A half hour later, at 10:42, the Windesens and another U.S. ship, the frigate Montgomery, answered the attack. 2 Iranian boats were sunk and a third was damaged. 5 minutes after this exchange, at 10:47 a.m., Iran Air Flight 655, an A300 Airbus, took off from the joint military-civilian airfield at Bandar Abbas, Iran. It was bound for Dubai across the Gulf. The Windesens detected the plane apparently heading toward it. Admiral William Crowe, Jr., chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, describes what happened next.
This aircraft headed toward the Windesens and commenced closing at high speed.
Crowe says 7 warnings were sent on both military and civilian frequencies. None was answered.
There were electronic indications on Windesens that led it to believe that the aircraft was an F-14. At 10:54 a.m., when the aircraft was about 9 miles away, Windesens fired 2 standard surface-to-air missiles, at least one of which hit at an approximate range of 6 miles.
The Windesens is an Aegis-class cruiser, a billion-dollar collection of some of the most sophisticated radar, computer, and weapon systems on Earth. When it was dispatched to the Persian Gulf 6 weeks ago, Captain Will C. Rogers described its value this way.
Because of the capabilities of the radar, the surveillance system, and her ability to bring a lot of firepower to bear if she has to, I just think it provides a lot of options.
So how could so sophisticated a ship mistake a civilian airliner for the far smaller and faster F-14 fighter plane? First, the Persian Gulf has been a center of naval and air combat since American forces arrived more than a year ago to escort Kuwaiti ships. Cases of mistaken identity abound. Iranian gunboats have attacked oil tankers servicing Iranian ports. Iraq has hit ships servicing its own allies. 2 months ago, an American ship fired a missile at an American helicopter.
It's a guts ball game. The place is full of airplanes flying all over the place.
Second, even the most sophisticated radar system has trouble distinguishing aircraft flying toward it head-on. And this difficulty was made worse by several anomalies with Iran Air 655. It was apparently flying outside the civilian air corridor. It was apparently flying well below normal civilian aircraft altitudes. And most important, it did not possess or was not using the normal electronic identification system civilian aircraft use. Add to this the ever-present possibility of human error.
But that radar screen gets very crowded, and it's up to the radar operator to distinguish and make priorities between targets. Those are tough decisions. The computers don't make that for you. That's a human decision.
The disaster inevitably raised comparisons with the Soviet shoot-down 5 years ago of Korean Airlines Flight 007, where 269 civilians were killed. Soviet officials today wryly recalled American outrage at that attack.
I recall participating in the ABC Nightline broadcast. Kirkpatrick was involved, and she didn't give me a minute to speak. She was accusing us of being murderers, of downing a passenger airliner.
The underlying cause of the whole thing was the Soviet proclivity for using violence and then lying about it.
Today, President Reagan angrily dismissed comparisons.
With regard to the Soviets comparing this to the KAL shoot-down, there was a great difference. Our shot was fired as the result of a radar screen of a plane approaching it at quite a distance. Remember, the KAL, a group of Soviet fighter planes went up, identified the plane for what it was, and then proceeded to shoot it down.
Finally, the Vincennes was operating under rules of engagement developed in the shadow of last year's disaster aboard the frigate Stark, where 37 U.S. sailors were killed by an Iraqi missile. The captain of that ship, who held off taking action, was forced to retire from the service. Now the rule is to strike as soon as an aircraft can be determined to be hostile.
He could have fired at least 30 seconds earlier and been absolutely justified in terms of the rules of engagement. But he took it in right to the point where his ship was threatened.
The first concern is the possibility of Iranian retaliation. That Muslim republic is in mourning for its dead, and its officials have pledged revenge. But how real is that threat?
I think there are government figures who would very much like to see this sort of incident de-escalate. They don't want a confrontation with the United States. They know they can't win it. On the other hand, though, in public terms, they can't afford to admit that. The result will be that they will have to do something to demonstrate to domestic opinion that they are strong enough to stand up to the United States inside the Gulf.
The Iran air disaster could also threaten the safety of American hostages held by pro-Iranian militants somewhere in Lebanon. But past confrontations with Iran have not resulted in harm to those hostages. Perhaps the ultimate questions involve U.S. policy in the Gulf. In the short run, that may mean persuading moderate states in the region to use their aircraft or airfields to help prevent deadly cases of mistaken identity.
The real policy question is, should we pressure very strongly the states in the region to give us access to their airfields so that we can keep reconnaissance aircraft in the region 24 hours a day? Unless you have a visual capability for reconnaissance, we're always going to be risking the kind of disaster that we've seen yesterday.
The ultimate question, though, is the purpose of American might in the Persian Gulf. Most congressmen and senators have stood by the administration in the wake of Sunday's air tragedy, and so far Congress has refused to invoke the War Powers Act, which would require congressional authorization of U.S. naval presence in that region. The issue now is whether the horrifying images of this July 4th are going to raise new doubts about the intentions and the costs of our policy. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
A little later, we'll be talking to Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Mohammad Jafar Mahalati. But first, when we come back, what's it like to face the kind of decision that the skipper of the USS Vincennes had to make? We'll be joined by U.S. Navy Captain Daniel Murphy, who was commanding officer of the guided missile destroyer USS Kidd when it was on patrol in the Persian Gulf for 4 months last year. Captain Daniel Murphy is currently Executive Assistant to the Commander-in-Chief of the USS Kidd, a guided missile destroyer that was Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy's Atlantic Command in Norfolk, Virginia. Previously, he served as commanding officer of the USS Kidd, a guided missile destroyer that was one of 3 ships on the first escort mission dispatched by President Reagan to protect U.S. flagged shipping in the Gulf. It was also one of 4 ships that destroyed an Iranian oil complex in the Gulf last October. Captain Murphy is with us now from Norfolk. Captain Murphy, an investigating team is on its way to the Gulf now. I know there are answers yet to come, but as much as possible, put us in the shoes of Captain Rogers yesterday. The information available to him, the pressure's on him.
Well, I can't discuss the specifics regarding the incident the day before yesterday. I can say from my own experience that the commanding officers of our ships in the Persian Gulf are making very complex decisions on the order of 10 to 15 times per day, attempting to sift through all the information available to them, the radar presentation being only the first step in a series of assessments that are necessary in order to attempt to distinguish among the more than 100 to 150 aircraft that are flying over the southern Persian Gulf on any given day.
But the question that keeps coming up for most of us is how did the Windsands mistake an Airbus for an F-14?
Well, I think it's important to realize that a radar presentation does not give you any information other than the fact that there is a radar contact, an air contact, and it will give you its position, its course, its speed, and its altitude.
But is a blip just a blip on the screen?
A blip is a blip on the screen. I've heard some commentary to the effect that there should have been an ability to recognize the difference between the two aircraft based on the size of the blip, but that simply is not factual.
Are there added pressures on commanders in that area in view of what happened to the Stark last year, the loss of 37 lives to Iraqi missiles, the end of a career for the commander of that ship?
Well, I think the end of a career certainly was the last thing on my mind. The first thing in my mind was to complete the mission and to do so safely, to ensure the safety of both my ship and my crew.
How difficult is it for a Navy built to operate in open seas to operate in this Gulf, what some people call a big lake?
Well, the Gulf presents a situation where we have both a brown water and a blue water war. That is both close-in threat that is represented by moored mines as well as fast patrol boats and small high-speed boats that have been used to attack merchant shipping in the very constricted waterways of the western Persian Gulf. The congestion in the Persian Gulf is made much the worse by the fact that Iran long ago declared fully half of the Persian Gulf to be an exclusionary zone, or a war zone, if you will, which has forced the funneling of all neutral shipping into some very narrow and more hazardous to navigate passages to the west.
Captain Murphy, let me ask you a hard question. It's hard to second guess a colleague, but given what you know, do you have any question that Captain Rogers could or should have done more, that he had any other choice?
Well, let me say first that without being shoulder to shoulder with Captain Rogers in the CIC of Windsands, there is no way to make any sort of a judgment whatsoever. Based on everything that I have heard through open sources in the press, I'm very proud of the actions that he's taken. It certainly appeared that he waited to the absolute last minute before making the decision to fire.
Captain Murphy, thank you. When we come back, we'll be joined by Mohammad Jafar Mahalati, the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, and by Gary Sick, a former member of the National Security Council, specializing in Iranian affairs under Presidents Ford, Carter, and Reagan. Mohammad Jafar Mahalati is Iran's ambassador to the United Nations and is with us now in our New York studios. Also with us in New York is Gary Sick, who was a member of the National Security Council from 1976 till 1981, specializing in Iranian affairs. He's currently an adjunct professor of Middle East politics at Columbia University. Mr. Ambassador, no one sees what happened yesterday as anything but a tragedy, but everyone from President Reagan to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff down to the captain of that cruiser has said this was an accident. Can you not accept it as that?
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, indeed not, because of a few number of reasons. First is that previous to this occasion, we have had continuous interception by American forces into civil aviation of Iran, which has been recorded and filed in the United Nations, as I said, continuously. And that proves that the United States has been doing this and exercising this in a systematic and continuous manner. Secondly, that the whole operation, recent operation, was initiated by United States forces having under attack our boats who had ordinary routine operation and have been under severe attacks, and afterwards there was a missile fired at this civilian airplane without any kind of justification. And another reason is that they made up in a very clumsy way a cover-up story with two matters. First was that the most sophisticated ship of United States forces in the Persian Gulf could not differentiate between a civil airliner, which is large, and a fighter jet, and that all of a sudden our civil airliner changed its route and having on board 290 passengers, 66 children, and including 50 women, all of a sudden it's changed the path and went towards the zone of battle, which is against the minimum of sense and common sense and reason.
Mr. Ambassador, the United States says, and an Italian ship confirms, that there were repeated warnings to this plane that went unanswered.
Even if we accept that there has been warning, and even if we accept that the captain, the pilot of our plane, has received these warnings, I don't know how and why the pilot should have taken these warnings against himself, knowing that United States forces always were aware of our routine flights, scheduled flights, and that this has been an exercise continuously for many years now, that we have been using the same corridors, and in particular since the presence of United States forces in Persian Gulf, we have been using the same route 5 days every week and twice at least every day, and never being directly attacked, though we have been threatened. So I don't know why and how should the pilot have taken this against himself. And therefore, I mean, it could easily interpret it that it has been against some fighters. In any case, we have not received any information from the pilot when he disappeared. And it proves that this is a totally cover-up story.
Mr. Ambassador, let me bring Gary Sick into this, and let me say at this point that Nightline asked for a representative of the Reagan administration to join us tonight, either from the White House, the State Department, or the Pentagon. That request was declined. Gary Sick, I'm not going to put you in the surrogate position here. We should put on the record, I assume you have no question that this was an accident.
No, I have no question that it was an accident.
Was it an isolated, tragic incident, or was it a symptom of broader problems with our policy there?
Well, it seems to me there are several problems. First of all, technology really failed. Second of all, I see this more as a political failure than I do as a military failure. I have great sympathy for the problems facing the commanders of the ships operating in that area. Split-second decisions, decisions that have to be made that are really life and death in a very confined environment. Our policy has put those ships out there on the front line, pushed them into a very forward-leaning position, and then left them to make those decisions. It seems to me that an accident like this was probably inevitable over time.
Well, what's the answer to that policy? Get out of the Gulf?
No, I don't think we have to get out of the Gulf, but I do think that there are several things that we can do to get our priorities straight. First, I think we do have to put more emphasis on peacemaking as opposed to war making. We have to get out of the position of being a belligerent in this war. I think there are some fixes that we can make in our own policy in terms of our terms of engagement, and also in the way we deploy our forces in the region, that really do need to be examined again as a result of this tragedy.
All right, let's come back and pick up there, and we'll continue our discussion in just a moment. Continuing our discussion now with Ambassador Mohammad Jafar Mahalati, Captain Daniel Murphy, and Gary Sick. Captain Murphy, you just heard Gary Sick describe this as a virtually untenable position for military commanders in that area. Is that right?
No, I certainly don't agree. It's a difficult situation, but we've been trained for it. We can handle it. We have 10 to 15 ships now who are interconnected through a digital data link system maintaining both air and surface surveillance throughout the 500 miles of the Persian Gulf. And I believe that their presence has served as a very real deterrent to what otherwise might have been greatly increased Iranian activity, attacks against neutral shipping.
Gary Sick, The United States and Iran seem to have had one bitter dispute after another for years through two administrations. What will this one do to relations between the two countries?
Well, unfortunately, I put this in the same category as with some of the other major encounters that we've had. The revolution, the hostage crisis, the Iran-Contra affair, and now this certainly is going to live, at least in Iranian memory, as one of those landmark points that seems to come along periodically to demolish whatever progress was being made in relations with Iran.
Mr. Ambassador, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Well, I think that the wisest thing that can be done by the United States at this point is to immediately withdraw its forces from Persian Gulf. Looking at the fact that the United States now saying that it is incompetent and incapable of differentiating between civilian airliners and jet fighters is a good reason enough to withdraw immediately from Persian Gulf and to have a neutral position vis-a-vis Iran-Iraq war and to apologize for the crime and for the terrorist attack that they have had. I think this will rectify the wrongdoings of American policy in the past and will be an opening.
The United States has expressed its regrets. Has there been any formal apology?
Well, I think that regrets are much shorter than apology. Apology definitely by itself cannot wash away the amount and the magnitude of the blood which was shed without any justification in Persian Gulf. What is needed is some action by the United States to show its sincerity that it really wants to rectify its wrongdoing in the past and to let the Persian Gulf, the countries, to bring about peace and security for this troubled region.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm afraid our time is up. Thank you very much. Captain Murphy, thank you. Gary Sick, thank you. That's our report for tonight. I'm Barry Seraphin in New York. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.